Drawing supplies, first thing we have to consider is paper. Let's imagine that we are in the art shop, we're in the paper aisle. How do we choose? All right, so the first and most important thing that we need to know about paper is that we want it to be archival, right? We want it to be acid free. We don't want to make a drawing on a paper and then have it yellow after 4 years. Now, luckily, the vast majority of papers that you're going to find in an art supply store are already going to be acid free. They're already going to be archival, with the notable exception of newsprint, which is a commonly used sketching paper. Anything you do on newsprint will not look great after 4 years, but most papers that are, manufactured by art supply companies, they already have that taken care of. So you don't have to worry about that. Now to the more interesting stuff. So let's say we are shopping proper artistic papers. How do we pick? What do we care about? So the two properties that I think matter the most are the property of the texture of the paper and the property of the color of the paper. So the texture of the paper, we have papers that are very, very, very smooth and papers that are fairly textured. This influences the way that our dry media gets accumulated on the surface. What do I mean by that? If we are working on a textured paper, there are these ridges that are able to bite into our dry media and basically create these valleys that can contain more of the dry substance that gets deposited from our stick or our pencil and linger on the surface of the paper. So a simple way to explain that is a paper that has little valleys, little pockets that can collect more charcoal will allow us to reach darker values, right? Because more powder gets accumulated in these little holes. That's a benefit, right? So we want that if we are interested in making drawings that are very, very rich, that have very deep darks or very deep colors, or if we're working with a medium like pastel that is a little bit difficult to convince to stick to the paper. Then for that purpose, a textured paper would make a lot of sense. However, the downside of a textured paper is the fact that because the powder gets accumulated in these little crevices, they become very, very difficult to remove, right? So if you are interested in making a drawing loosely and continuously erase, then a textured paper will be way, way, way harder to use. So this is like a pros and cons situation. Do you prefer that your drawing be fast, dynamic, and, open for change? Or do you prefer your drawing to be more polished, finished, rich, and have a wide spectrum of values? It is also the case that a smooth paper makes it a little bit easier to create soft, uniform areas of value, and also makes it easier to create fine details that are linear in quality. But as I said, they're going to end up being a little bit more narrow with the scope of the visual effects that you're going to be able to express on these papers. So what do I choose? For my personal preferences, I usually prefer smooth paper for anything that makes smooth paper possible, meaning I will choose smooth paper for pencil for sure. I will choose smooth paper for most of my charcoal work, but I would not choose smooth paper for soft pastels, because soft pastels, I've been trying to work with them on smooth paper recently, and it just doesn't grab onto the paper. The powder just kind of starts to fall. It's a total mess. So for me, I usually prefer to stay dynamic, flexible, and to have the opportunity to erase, unless the medium really won't let me, in which case I will go with the textured paper. I'll put a note here that my former teacher and one of the people I admire most to when it comes to drawing and painting, David Nippo, he, as far as I know, uses exclusively textured paper. So this is important because I never want to create a kind of dogma where I say I prefer smooth paper generally and then have everybody go to the art shop and buy smooth paper. That's irresponsible, because the smooth paper fits my temperament and what I care about in drawing. And Nippo, who is a better draftsman than me and taught me everything I know, chooses to go another way. Another thing to mention about paper is the paper weight, which for drawing, I think it totally doesn't matter. with the exception of if you're planning to work on it with wet media, it would start to matter, because when you're working on paper for painting, you kind of want a paper that's a little bit more sturdy because you're about to get aggressive with it. But I haven't found it to be possible to kind of like overwhelm a quote unquote flimsier paper with charcoal or with drawing supplies in general. So I've used heavier papers before, I've used lighter papers before, and I've always experienced good results. So I don't really look at the weight of the paper pretty much at all.
Pardon the interruption. Hope you're enjoying this video. And if you are, please take a moment to like it and to subscribe to my channel to make sure you don't miss any of my upcoming cool stuff. And if you want to support my mission of making art education affordable and accessible, please consider joining my Patreon through the link in the description below. You'll have access to live lessons, full recorded workshops, Q&As, and much, much more. And you can sign up today for as little as $2. Thanks in advance for the support. Now back to the action.
So the second property, okay, is the toned versus white question. Now, here I would almost always gravitate towards toned paper. It's very, very, very hard to catch me on a white paper mood day. And the reason for that is that it's just way faster and way easier to get results per se. Generally, the reason for that is if you're working on toned paper, you can use the tone of the paper as your middle value. And then basically as you draw, you have to worry about the darkest areas and the lightest areas. And then everything that's in the middle, you can kind of leave empty, which in a sketching environment, let's say you're in a museum and you're trying to capture something really quickly, then you have to kind of go in and boom, 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 and then get out, right? So you don't have the luxury of endless hours of work. And for that, that toned paper comes in super duper handy. And the Old Masters also, almost all my favorite Old Master drawings are done on toned paper. However, toned paper can be challenging if you're very, very, very new to this. So if you're very, very new to this and trying to juggle one dark agent and one light agent sounds like double the trouble, then for you, I would highly suggest using white paper, just because it's way easier to only have to deal with one instrument that does one thing. And of course, that is, that makes perfect sense. Let's just say for the entirety of my first year of learning how to draw, I only drew on white paper. And so it would be hypocritical to say that, toned paper is more effective, because yes, it's more effective once you know what you're doing. So it's possible that for those of you who have found toned paper to be too tricky, white paper might be a way to keep things a little bit more simple. And also, the thing about white paper is that despite the fact that it's very, very slow to get to satisfying results, once you do, the white of the paper, when you really kind of manage to arrange your value hierarchy such that the very few areas that remain paper white are as I described, there's very few areas of those, then the white paper really, really shines, because of course the brightness of factory white paper cannot be matched by any kind of white pencil. So if you really take the time to kind of cover up your whole paper with graphite or charcoal, except for these few areas that you plan to be super duper bright, then the light effects that you're going to be able to achieve are going to surpass by far anything that a toned paper can do. So you're already starting to notice a theme here, that when there's a choice between the fast and effective, or the laborious, slow, and more polished, when you have these two things up against each other, I tend to pick the former. Like, I like things to be fast, effective, so that I can, get in there, get it done, and get out. But if I had to do like a very, very, very finished, polished drawing that maximizes value contrast and maximizes depth, white paper would actually deliver it better. It would take 5 times as long.